Welcome to Restorative Justice Reflections, a show where we reflect on things that are happening in media, news, pop culture, and ask restorative, reflective questions that help us make sense of it all. I'm David Castro-Harris, and I'm here with Kala Mendoza to take a deep dive into the themes of HBO's The Last of Us, Episode 6, Kin. Of course, as always, the thoughts here are not to critique the story or production choices of the creators, but we hope to make connections between the themes present in the story and how we co-create a world where people and communities can survive and thrive in post-apocalyptic times and now. As always, if you want to learn more about how to connect with us, links to get attached to our work is in the show notes. But let's get to it. I guess one more thing, spoiler alert, for the first part of our conversation, everything that's happened in the HBO show through episode 6 is fair game. You've been warned. And at the end of the episode, we'll let those who know the Last of Us lore, everything going on in the universe, is fair game. But of course, we'll give you a heads up before that. So, episode 6 of The Last of Us, Kin, Kala, how'd this episode land for you?
Oh, it landed in all the ways. It was so, when I look at The Last of Us from a prepper and mutual protection lens, I'm always trying to pull out, what are the themes and what are the learnings? This was really, I felt that Kin was asking us about who are our kinship ties, who are those that we consider chosen or chosen family. It was, I know we'll get into it, but like opening up with Graham Greene and Elaine Miles, almost like stating that Indigenous people are still here in the apocalypse. Like, yeah, that was like a beautiful start to what was a very gentle, I felt, episode, which showed us kind of like the differences between communism versus fascism, and what cooperation versus control looks like if we're seeing Joel on one end and his brother on the other. So, yeah.
Yeah, rather gentle episode, but it had a really violent start, really violent end, right? Because the first thing that we see is a recap, a flashback to Henry and Sam from the last episode. Henry shooting Sam and then taking his own life. And then we cut to 3 months later, right? And in that 3 months, we know that Joel and Ellie have been making their way from Kansas City to somewhere in Wyoming, where they encounter the indigenous elders, and that beautiful parallel of like, we can survive on our own, similar to what Bill and Frank had been doing in episode 3, was a really cool reminder and foreshadowing to things to come, like maybe like future in the Last of Us universe, that like there are lots of people who are doing it, surviving in ways that make sense for them. Of course, life is not the way that it was in 2003, when the outbreak first happened. But, relying on indigenous knowledge systems, ways of knowing the land, taking care of the land to carve out a life for yourself, was modeled really well.
Definitely agreed. And it's, by gentle, I meant it's gentle in the larger scope, right? I'm curious, and I'm wondering if any readers were thinking this, for Marlon and Florence, the two indigenous elders, do you think they knew about Jackson, and that's why they kind of, they knew about them already, and that's why they're kind of not warning, but telling Joel and Ellie that on that side is death?
I don't. I think they were warning them about something else that both you and I know is coming. But I will, like another community, perhaps.
Oh.
See, like, I don't know, like that's what I'm imagining that they're talking about. But they might not have known, right? When you carve out that kind of space for yourself and like set boundaries for yourself, as like, this is as far as I will go for the safety of myself and my family. You might not know what's on the other side. No specifics, but there is more trouble on the horizon for Ellie and Joel. And I guess I'll say, like, this isn't a spoiler per se. I think many viewers can infer from this having the show having 3 more episodes left. Like Joel isn't dead, right? Joel is like very, very hurt, and Ellie having to deal with that and make choices around how to survive while having to take care of someone else is something that we're going to see, but is really important. And I think we talk about how like when they depart from the space, like Ellie is in many ways already stepping into that role of protecting Joel. Like even though like Joel is reluctant to share that burden of protecting their little family, their little unit, their traveling party, she's stepping up. And like while we haven't seen what's happened across the last 3 months, we see that she has picked up a lot from Joel and is able to take care in ways that he might not be giving her credit for.
Yeah, I mean, like the opening scene where Joel said that he would be, staying up to watch, to stay on watch, and then Ellie being the one to basically protect him is like it's essentially what we talk about in our work around everyone in the community has the capacity and ability to protect each other. Mm-hmm. We all have different strengths, and it's important for us not to fall into a very, white supremacist, patriarchal, settler way of thinking about protection, where it's like power over, mm-hmm. but actually sharing that responsibility of protecting each other. So that was a very poignant moment, and I was like, "Ooh!" I hope Joel is going to be learning about this, and he'll have to very, very soon.
Yeah. By the end of this episode, like he doesn't have a choice at all. And I think, speaking to like this saviorism, this paternalism that like is constantly showing up in the world of The Last of Us, specifically between Joel and Ellie, and we can see it in other spaces too, right? I think he is softening, right? He is gradually learning, right? He has started to trust in some ways, and we'll see that play out a little bit more as we get into the episode a little bit later. But, I think part of the ability to trust someone to protect you and protect themselves is being able to let go of things that have happened in the past, right? And Joel is somebody who has experienced a lot of trauma, who has been let down by a lot of people. And so like he in his mind has developed patterns of thinking about like, I'm the only one who can do this. I'm the only one who's like really going to look after me, take care of myself, who's really going to have my back, right? Even in this search for Tommy, right? He thinks that he's going out to save Tommy, but like when he encounters the cavalry, this watch party that comes out and surrounds him and Ellie as they're marching through the plains of which is actually Alberta, but pretend Wyoming, and then brought back to their settlement, he sees that Tommy doesn't need saving. Tommy's good. Tommy has, in many ways, moved on and is living a thriving life with a community of people who he's taking care of and are taking care of him. Yeah,
the thriving part, right? It feels like, I don't want to make binaries, but Joel is very much about surviving. And like we saw that with what he was doing for 20 years at the QZ in Boston, whereas Tommy's always been drawn to cooperation and supporting others. I mean, that's what one of the showrunners in the podcast said, that, a military recruiter probably told Tommy that he'd be spreading democracy or whatever else, right? And like being able to find a space for folks who are more on the cooperative side that wants to do good with others is really kind of like the place that Tommy inhabits. And it's just interesting to see those two frameworks clash in very real and visceral ways.
Yeah, I mean, and the manifestation of that on an individual level versus like on a communal level looks like very different ideologies, right? It's not necessarily like just like libertarian, everyone out for themselves and like diehard like socialism, communism, but like everybody on our individual journeys and the individual ways that we navigate the world under capitalism. I imagine if you're listening to this podcast, that's the system that you're living under. But, the way that we decide to do that systemically or cooperatively, maybe not like on a national level, but within the communities that we participate in, can look very different, right? We've seen violence be the tip of the spear and, kind of the way of life in many communities that we've encountered across The Last of Us so far, right? Ruling by fear. And it seems in this community of Jackson, while there definitely are measures to protect, right? Protect against infected, protect against raiders, within the community, it's a lot more built on trust, mutuality. And I'd be so much more curious to learn, spin-off show about like the origins of Jackson, right? What it took to get to a democratically elected council. How do we build a multi-faith house of worship, right? How do we decide that we have a jail, but we don't really use it, right? What were those decision-making processes? I know we might get more allusions into that into season 2 where, we revisit Jackson. I guess that's a spoiler. Damn, I'm sorry. We revisit Jackson at some point. I won't say in what circumstances, but there are characters that we care about in Jackson. One of the things that they encounter in Jackson is this corral that has a bunch of sheep, and it's calling back to Joel and Ellie's conversation around a campfire before about, what would you do when this is all over, right? It's framed as what are we gonna do? And Ellie walks it back to just oh, are we a we? Okay, I guess fine. What are you gonna do? And Joel talks about finding land and raising sheep because they're quiet. Ellie dreams of going to space, which is a beautiful dream. And hey, maybe together they'll raise sheep in space on the moon or something like that. But I'm curious for you. We're not living in the mushroom zombie apocalypse, but what do you dream of as the after this work?
In the dystopia that we're in right now, or the one in...
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think now is a more practical question to ask. What is it that you're working towards, right?
Yeah. I think for me, and I ask a lot of folks that have been doing this work for decades, where do we go from here? I think for me, I want to run a science camp where folks, of all ages come in to learn about the local ecology, most especially from an Indigenous perspective, and to really learn from Indigenous folks, how do we actually become stewards of the land? I think that I want to one day move away from the protection work, because it is, I connect with Joel so much because I was yeah, I'm tired too. I'm exhausted. I want to do something that is gentle, that's generative, that brings joy, and that's something that, folks can learn from one another and from the earth.
Yeah. It's hard for me to define for myself, what after this means, right? Because I've just embarked on a parenting journey, and what is required in that is, the protection and guidance and safety and, all the things that come with being a parent for this little one. And so part of doing that is finding ways to be in community or contribute to community in a way that you'll be able to monetize that. And, in so many ways, the work of Amplify RJ is actually doing that. I think, so much of Amplify RJ's work currently is supported by work that I do with organizations. And I think that's helpful. I appreciate so much more the work that I get to do directly with community members who are trying to learn these ways, and figuring out a way to do that in a manner that's sustainable, both time-wise, energy-wise, and monetarily, is what I'd love to move to. I've been really happy over the last couple of weeks to like be able to make this time with you to talk about things that are going on in the world and help people make connections. And I've been really tickled. My heart has been warmed with all the feedback that we've been getting from people who like are really being served by these conversations. I met up with a couple of friends this last weekend who were like, yeah, like I really love this. And like, if I feel like my brain can make contributions to help people think about these ways of being, that's what feels good for me. And that can look like a number of different things. I guess at the end of the day, it's all teaching, but it can look like a number of different things. But in the zombie apocalypse, who knows what that looks like? I would definitely want to be more a part of a Jackson community than a Fedra, QZ, or revolutionary Kansas City party. But it remains to be seen what else will manifest. So while Joel and Tommy are like touring this community, Ellie is making connections with Maria, who is Tommy's, we learn, wife, pregnant wife, at that. And, through that connection, we learn a couple things. One, we learn about Tommy and Maria's history. We both learned that, they've been like pretty well adjusted to their community. They haven't been shy with each other about their community members, about the loss that they felt inside of their house. Tommy and Maria both have a memorial to the children that they've lost. While Sarah, Joel's daughter, wasn't Tommy's biological daughter, right? Like they have a memorial for her, and Maria has a memorial for her son Kevin, who was lost. And when Ellie sees this, that's when she makes the realization that Joel has a daughter who died around her age, and she was like, "Oh, that makes so much sense." In that conversation with Maria, and what that's a reminder to me of is, everyone who we're encountering on the daily has stuff in their past that they're not telling us, and the manifestation of their behaviors due to what's in their past, like, might not make sense to us, but that's because like we just don't know those things. And it's really a reminder to be generous and gentle with people as we encounter them. I think there's always the need for healthy skepticism for protection, but there's always this reminder for me that like we're all good at our core, and we've had things happen to us that have caused us to like try to meet needs, sometimes in rather unhealthy ways. When you're watching this scene of realization between Sarah and Maria, what was coming up for you?
In the moment where there was that connection, that Ellie saw Sarah's name, and Maria, who was serving, for lack of a better term, as a maternal figure, similar to Tess, for me, what was coming up was someone that was invested in not just like the physical safety, but also the emotional safety of Ellie, and was doing what they could to kind of foster that in real time. Like how we saw with Maria getting that eggplant colored jacket, like doing the things that Joel may not have been able to do to show that character, kind of like build that. So yeah, for me, it was Maria just being very, very emotionally intelligent and being able to identify what Ellie's needs were in that moment.
Yeah, both like physical needs, like warmth, menstrual hygiene. Shout out to Diva Cups. But like when we're speaking to emotional safety, and I think like physical safety as well, when Ellie is hesitant to share about her background and what's been going on with her, I think this leads to the exchange of the episode where Maria identifies that like there's a whole lot that you're not telling me, and like good for you. Yeah. That's the point. Be careful who you put your faith in, because only the people who can betray us are the ones that we trust. Right. And, that's both like physical and emotional betrayal, physical and emotional safety. So important when you are navigating a world with raiders, bandits, infected, right? People who will watch out for you when you sleep, watch out for you when you're traversing open territory, watch out for you while you're encountering people who you're unfamiliar with, but also holding space for you when you're dealing with trauma. Like, right, Joel does in the ways that he can hold space for Ellie's fear and sadness and rage in events that we've seen so far around Henry and Sam dying, around having to shoot someone else, Brian, earlier, right? But like, he is not fully at that place where he can do that. But we see that Ellie has appreciated it so much and is really defensive of any critique of Joel because he's the person who has been present for her. He's a person who has continued to show up.
Yeah, and I'm not to jump ahead too much, but like when there was that point where Ellie overheard Joel and Tommy discussing what the plan was, and felt that betrayal, and felt that I can't remember the exact line, but it was, "I may be safer with Tommy, but I'll still be scared," right?
Oh, yeah. The exact line is, "Don't tell me I'd be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared."
Yeah. So it's, it is about that trust. It's about something that we talk about in Nonviolent Peace Force, like holistic safety and security. In order to be able to meet the needs of folks when it comes to feeling safe, you have to have aspects of the physical, psychosocial, spiritual, etc. And I think because of the trust Ellie's built with Joel up to this point, breaking that would really have been just detrimental.
I think we can jump back to the conversations between Joel and Tommy in a second, but this exchange where Ellie and Joel are going back and forth about, Tommy's going to take you. No, I want to go with you. I'd feel safer with you. I would only be more scared with Tommy, right? I question that a lot, right? There's so much about this show where I'm like, oh, you actually could have spent a couple days. You could have broken this to her a little bit more gently. Obviously, she overheard this, but we can have a more fleshed out conversation. Hey, I'm feeling that I can't protect you because of my anxiety around keeping you safe. I failed to keep Tess safe. I failed to keep Sarah safe. My brother knows this place so much better than I do. He knows the Fireflies. He would be the best person to guide you on this journey. Let's give you an opportunity to get to know him, right? Might have assuaged Ellie's fears of, right, everybody in my life abandons me. Because of the incident with Sam and Henry, Ellie is now more than ever committed to being the cure. She has so much purpose. And if Joel has a conversation with her about Tommy is your best shot at finding the Fireflies so you can be the cure for humanity who can save us all, she might have been more willing to go along with that plan. We'll talk more about that in spoiler section, but they rush through all of these choices and these conversations. But I learned a really important lesson around urgency and emergencies a long time ago. We're on the heels of another earthquake in Turkey and Syria where tens of thousands, I think we're approaching 50,000 people have died. And I did work in Haiti post the 2010 earthquake. And one of the things that I learned then from the people who I was working with is there are very, 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 very few things that are actual life and death emergencies that need to be attended to right now in this moment. That's why triage is a practice within emergency medicine. But we often have more time than we think to make choices, right? And as urgently as they want to get to the Fireflies so Ellie can, so Ellie's blood can be studied, it's already taken them 3+ months. What's a couple more days to, again, have these conversations restock, refuel, rest, right? They haven't eaten very well. They haven't slept very well. Having these conversations about strategy, about how to go about this, and like actually thinking about how Tommy is really the best person. You will be safer with Tommy than you would be with me. You might not feel it, but let's get you to the point where you feel safe with Tommy, or safe enough with Tommy so you can go and do this thing. Might serve them really, really well.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, like, that's the difference between people that subscribe to the more paternalistic form of protection, where you feel like you're charged with having to make all of the decisions, instead of actually reinforcing someone's autonomy, reinforcing someone's agency, and like sharing that responsibility and strategizing out. It's a white settler myth of scarcity, right? Where there just isn't enough time. Everything is an emergency. If we actually took the time to move through with folks what a plan, or what the strategy is, what the plan is, we not only get more buy-in, but we also have more perspective on what are the things that we need to change. So I hope this is like a teaching moment, really comparing Joel. And this is not to fault Joel or anyone that subscribes to this, but we need to grow beyond that and move towards something that's much more cooperative, one that's much more grounded in a shared and mutual responsibility for each other's safety.
Yeah. And like, I think even like somatically, biologically, like when you have that pressure on yourself, like your cortisol levels are asking you to make like these fight, flight, freeze, fawn decisions, right? That aren't rooted in seeing the whole picture, right? And even, sometimes it's worth it to like pause and like do things cooperatively. But even in moments when you're by yourself, like pausing, right? In work I've done with Resma Menakem, so much of what he says is just pause, right? Pause, like what's happening? Like, where are you feeling it? Why? Acknowledge that and pause a little bit more, and then like move forward to make a more informed decision that's not rooted in I'm stressed out right now, is really helpful. And so like I can't recommend My Grandmother's Hands enough, or any of the somatic abolitionist work that Resma and others are doing. But that's an aside. I do want to revisit the conversation between Joel and Tommy, right, where Joel finally admits to Tommy like the real reason why they're there. Like after this exchange about, hey, we have done so much harm, and Tommy, the way that Tommy is reckoned with that by trying to contribute to building something, and Joel is still stuck in this survivor mode. Tommy's trying to build a life with his family that Joel feels like he has no opportunity to regain, and like, subconsciously thinks about Ellie as that family. But, when they were having this exchange, what was present for you?
I was putting myself in Joel's shoes and feeling like a sense of betrayal, of like, not betrayal, but more, I don't think envy is the right word, but just like a feeling of like, this is so unfair, Mm-hmm. I lose Sarah. I give up my humanity to protect, like the narrative in his mind is like, he did everything. He like murdered innocent people to protect Tommy. And here's Tommy now saying that, the reasons that he couldn't reach out to Joel is because the protocols in Jackson, and Joel automatically went right to like, oh, is Maria controlling you? Which is interesting, because I was like, Joel, that's what you've been doing. So it's, to me, what arose was Joel operating from a state of trauma, a state of not being able to move outside of the murder of Sarah. And I was like, I wish don't they have like a therapist there? They must have had someone, like, yeah, it's good to like, I just wish also, going back to what you're saying, there was like a pause, but that, it's neither here nor there. This is more learning for us, right? like, is this moment the best time to bring this up? Is there a way that we can pause so that way the conversation is more generative and honors people's trauma and experience, but also finds a path forward?
Right. We've gone, I think it's like 7 years since they've seen each other. Right. And of course, like, there's this immediate, like, oh my goodness, you're alive. I'm so happy that you're alive. But then, like, hey, where have you been? I've been trying to get a hold of you. I didn't know if you were okay. That's a paternal instinct. And I think, like, not one that we should criticize, right? Like, we want to be in right relationship with people. And part of being in right relationship is, like, being in communication, in some ways, like, in reciprocal relationship. And that was broken. And so what are the ways that we can repair that relationship between the two of them? They don't take the time to stop and repair. They do come to a consensus about, like, hey, this is what needs to be done for the good of humanity. And, like, we're going to squash what has happened in the past for now, right? And, you always have like Tommy says to Joel, like, you always have a place back here in Jackson when all this is over. But, they haven't, like, gotten to that place of repair. And sometimes, as much as, like, we're critiquing the rushness, sometimes, like, that is all we can do in any given moment. Like, we're working under imperfect conditions where we don't always have the time, we don't always have the resources to, like, have long drawn out discussions to get back fully in right relationship. And we need to make decisions about community safety, community protection, or within the context of work, right? Decisions about work before everybody is fully on board because of circumstances outside of our control. But, it's a reminder that, like, taking those pauses, always being able to revisit conversations with people, always being able to revisit relationships with people is so, so important. This episode also brought out, the deep bond that, like, Ellie has for Joel and, that Joel has for Ellie. And by the time they depart Jackson, like, you see them connected more than they have ever before. Of course, some of this revolves around, like, learning to shoot, and learning to protect yourself, learning to hunt, in these times. But, like, Joel is a lot more open with Ellie about some of the things that, about his past, about some of the things that he dreams of for the future. Ellie's still cracking jokes, and there's so much more connection and hope between them once they've made this choice about, like, no, we're going to do this together. And then tragedy strikes. Any reflection on, like, their growth of their relationship before we get to the violence of it all?
No, I mean, like, I think it's important to note, like, for me, this is the first time I noticed Joel smiling, right? And there being, like, that moment of levity, and, like, there can be something shared once you decide to share the responsibility, and you can show care and protection by extending out what that looks like for everyone that's a part of it. So,
yeah. Sharing so much of yourself strengthens bonds. And I think as even people who are playing protector, paternal, guardian roles, right? Sharing who you are with the people who are in your care is an important way to build trust. Right? People don't just trust you because of the role that you inhabit. People trust you because they know you, and they won't know you unless you share some of those things. Joel and Ellie, bonding over football, or, like, explaining football, come across this college town where the Fireflies used to be, but realize that the Fireflies are no longer there. They've migrated to Salt Lake City, and as they are on their way out, they're attacked. This plays out a little bit differently in the game, but the end result is the same, with Joel seriously hurt. In the game, Joel falls off a balcony and is impaled by some rebar, and Ellie has to get him up onto the horse and escape. In this circumstance, Joel is stabbed with the shank of a baseball bat. And I think, like, before we move on to the rest of the story, this is a good time for Kala's practical preparatory corner. And I'll start by saying, if you're ever impaled, or if someone's ever impaled, don't pull it out. But what else do you got for us?
Yeah, so welcome to my prepper corner. So as we saw in this episode, we saw a Diva Cup in episode 3, we saw the pearl tampons. One thing I always tell folks to bring in their everyday carry or in make sure you have tampons and menstrual products in your first aid kit. One, you want to make sure you're an ally to folks that menstruate, but there are 3 ways that you can utilize this in an emergency scenario. Firstly, using it for its intended purpose, which is to, if Ellie had those tampons, what I would have told them is take it out, put it onto the wound, and apply pressure. Do not take out the baseball bat, but utilizing this to staunch up any wounds is one use. Secondly, using it to filter water. Once you take it out, you can use it as a part of a physical filtration system. There's more information on that, I'm sure, as you can find. But basically, if you were to find water or to filter water to make it drinkable, you want to make sure that you're first taking out any of the physical sediment or anything else before you boil it. So you can use this as a part of that kit. In infiltration, using a water bottle that you might find, stacking that up with sand, charcoal, anything else that'll take out any of the particulate matter. And lastly, using it as a source of fire, as a fire starter. One of the things that I've experienced in the past when backpacking is not having one of these ready and trying to start up a fire with wet or moist wood. As folks know, it's really difficult, and by the end of the day, the last thing that you want is a nice warm fire. So everyone should carry tampons with them on your everyday carry or in your first aid kit.
There you go. And that concludes Kala's Prepper Corner. But back to where we end this episode with Ellie distraught, needing to take care of Joel, having escaped, now in that protector role. You and I know some things that are coming. And before we get to the part where we start getting into spoilers, what were your thoughts as we left this episode?
My thoughts were how necessary it was for us to see Jackson, right? For folks who are, the trope in a lot of post-apocalyptic media is everyone just turns into chaos. And to be able to see a community that, has disabled folks, children, electricity, food. I think it's very telling that Kansas City, we didn't see many children. In Fedra, children were being trained as child soldiers, but here in Jackson was a ideal community that was brought together in order to actually rebuild and have hope for a better world. And that's what I kind of carried with me in those last shots, and then all this with Joel, and now I'm like, what the heck? But what a powerful way to end the episode.
Yeah, the roles are reversed, right? Ellie is now the protector, and we're going to see the things that she does to take care of Joel in the future. So this concludes the non-spoilers section. In this feed on Thursday, we've got another This Restorative Justice Life episode. We'll be back either next Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on our scheduling, to give our reflections on episode 7 of The Last of Us. But this is the time for you to sign off if you have not, or if you do not want spoilers for the rest of The Last of Us or anything moving forward. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Your fault if you're still listening. Okay. So, you and I had this conversation about how are they going to pace this out? So what's coming in episode 7 isn't something that was in the first game, but is from The Last of Us Left Behind, that was in between games 1 and 2, where we get a lot more knowledge about Ellie's backstory and some of the things that she's going to have to do. And as much as we're looking forward to that, we also dreading what's going to come with the things that Ellie has to do in order to protect her and Joel. And, so much of what we've seen Joel and Ellie Joel do is to protect Ellie from having to do these things. And I'm curious how it's going to be represented in the game. But like beyond shooting that one person, Ellie hasn't had to physically protect Joel before or protect herself in these ways before. And like, I wish for Joel that he had like extended more trust, right? In so many ways. So she would be better prepared for this situation. We know that she's going to do things that help them survive and, move forward. But I so wish that he had extended more trust so she would be more prepared for this when it happens.
Agreed. Dealing with David and like his crew. And these are the folks that we saw at, or at least in the game, these are the folks that were at the university, right?
Yeah.
This was like the scouting party. For viewers who haven't played the game, get ready. It's going to get really intense as we move forward with this new storyline of Ellie taking care of Joel and what Ellie has to do, and kind of like for lack of a better term, side quest Ellie has to embark on in order to keep Joel alive. So yeah.
This again calls back for me, like, would Ellie have been safer with Tommy, right? We know that in the end, right, Joel makes a decision against Ellie's wishes, and even though like he gave her a choice, like, who do you want to go with, like Tommy or like, and before he even finishes, like, it's you, let's go, is her response, right? Going with Tommy, I wonder like if Tommy would have given Ellie if Tommy would have been more able to protect Ellie and himself in that situation. Two, like even farther down the line, if Tommy would have given Ellie the agency to, hey, you are going to be the cure and this is what's going to happen and I'm going to deal with the consequences of that. It might have made things more difficult between him and Joel moving forward, right? With Ellie giving her life for the cause. But that's what I couldn't help but think in these circumstances, right? Like in the game, we see Tommy become a lot more like Joel, a lot more survival anger driven for reasons that, if you know the game, you know why. And we don't need to spoil season 2 for people who don't know yet. But it was interesting that Joel gave her that small choice. Not that small choice. It was interesting to me that Joel gave her that choice about who to go with, but didn't give her the ultimate choice about, what she's going to do with her life when it comes down to it.
Yeah, because it's like paternalistic protectorism came in, right? So Joel falls back on being a paternalistic protector at the end of the game, and rather than giving Ellie that choice point, and just decides for Ellie what to do, and in essence, screws with the fate of humanity. So curious to see if it goes a different way in the show. But what we've already seen in the game is Joel's a tough nut to crack when it comes to breaking out of those similar cycles of being paternalistic and seeing themselves just as a controlling protector.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that I wanted to bring up in spoilers is like the differences between Jackson as it was represented here and is represented in what we imagine is going to be season 2 or like the second part of The Last of Us, the game, right? In this version, we see Jackson as it is in the second game, right? In the first game, Jackson isn't developed yet. They're just trying to get the electricity started. But the community that Jackson becomes, I don't think is like as fully like democratic and communal as it's represented here. This comes back to the conversations that we were having about representation before, where if you think about where Jackson, Wyoming is and the demographics of a community like that, it was really interesting character choice to make Maria a Black woman. It was a really interesting character choice. Or story choice to show disabled people being represented. It was also a really interesting story choice to decide that, you know, we are multi-faith, we are more pluralistic, we are all like one happy family, when like we know that it's not fully. And, you know, I so want to get into the backstory of like the formation of that community, because like doing community in that way is really, really difficult, right? There are really hard choices that you have to make around what you tolerate and what you don't, who you're gonna include and who you're not, because that's not a community that welcomes everybody in, right? They came to Joel and Ellie with guns drawn, right? Not just because they were potentially infected, but because they've killed other people who haven't had their community's best interest in mind. And like, how do you determine who is us and who is them in those circumstances? You know, big foreshadow to game 2, right? Is a really nuanced and heavy discussion that like we didn't fully get to see.
Yeah, agreed. I really do hope the showrunners hear your invitation to kind of branch out and show us like the prequel to The Last of Us. But to your point about the messiness of building community, that's part of I think why some folks might be averse to not even organizing, but just like community building. We don't necessarily have to have the same. I'll just say this. In coalition building, which is different than community building, but in coalition building, you have a central goal, and your values may not be completely aligned, but if your goal is shared, your strategies, regardless of what the ideologies behind them are, your strategies are going to help you meet that goal. So the way I see it in these in post-apocalyptic scenarios, we need to be able to find our center, or like what is it that we're trying to accomplish, right? How can we strategically build together? I think in
can I jump in?
Oh, sorry.
Like when you're saying like how we build together, like how we build what together, right? A thriving community. Who defines thriving? Thriving for who? Who do we include? And like those are all the things. And you know, when we say the who part, what comes up in The Last of Us is like, there are people in our community who have harmed other people before, right? And when we say everyone thrives, do we say like, you can be a part of our community as long as you forget all the dirt that somebody has done for you and like, don't take revenge? Like that might be an invitation, but then somebody else's value of like, no, loyalty to like who I previously considered to be my people, means that like I have to get blood, or there has to be punishment. There has to be some kind of retribution for the things that happened to me and my people before I can like be in good relationship with you. That's the myth of redemptive violence that the second game is almost entirely about. But yeah, like we all want to thrive. Like we all want like humans to thrive, like as a general statement, but how we go about getting that and like the boundaries between who are us and who are them and whose needs or desires are more important in any given moment, like that's the hard part.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that how I've seen this work in different indigenous communities is like having a set of protocols in the way that folks show up. Building towards or working towards decolonization is by no means an easy feat, right? But what are the things that we need to set in place for folks to be able to hear, each other's perspectives, and to be able to craft a way forward? And to what you were saying earlier, like there are many limitations, but like what do we do with community members who have caused harm or continue to cause harm? What are the things in place that we need to be able to be practicing? And I think that's an invitation to listeners now. And I think that's why folks are listening now, is like, how do we incorporate restorative justice practices into our work, because like the mutual protection and prepping only goes so far if we don't have the heart of being able to address conflict as it arises, and to be able to build a better world with folks. What does that look like? And it's going to be messy. So what are the skills we need now?
Yeah, I think, we'll tease something that we'll have more details about later, but if you're still listening, part of us doing this work is inviting you all into visioning with us. And so sometime probably in April of 2023, if you're listening to this as it's being released, we'll be convening a gathering for people to, freedom dream about what building communities of safety, communities built to help people thrive, look like. But until then, until next week, when we hope to have more details, we hope that you all take care, stay safe, watch The Last of Us on Sundays, and take care of each other.
Be safe, y'all.